Okay, moving on, number 6, C15 and fatty liver in children. There appears to be an inverse association between dairy fat intake and C15 levels versus fatty liver in children. In other words, more dairy fat intake associated with less liver fat in children, and higher measured C15 levels likewise associated with less liver fat in kids. So to this I say to schools directly, kick out the approved low-fat sugary chocolate milk and bring back whole milk, please. All right, moving on. Number 7, C15 and longevity. Now, the data on C15 and longevity are, in my opinion, a bit weaker, but still interesting. Food for thought. For example, in one study conducted in Sardinia, researchers assessed the plasma profiles of octogenarians in high longevity Eastern Mountain area in Sardinia and lower longevity Northern Sardinia, and found that C15 levels were trending higher in the high longevity area. Now, I take these data in isolation with a grain of salt, or even a whole salt shaker, given that the study was small and probably underpowered. But when you frame these data with the data on dolphins and other animal data, and other population data on health span and lifespan in C15, well, I'm left at the very least scratching my chin. And that's a pretty good thing when it comes to longevity literature. Okay, moving on. 8. C15 levels in the body decrease with age. All I have to say about this, because it's a fact, is tell Granny to eat her pecorino and mullet, and we'll get to that more in a moment. Okay, number 9. C15 and human randomized controlled trials on fatty liver. There have been very few human RCTs on C15, and that's not bad per se, it's just the state of the literature to date. But I did want to give a nod to one in which young adults with obesity with a mean BMI of 33.4 kilograms per meter squared were given C15 in a double-blind controlled trial. And I won't say the results were groundbreaking, but they were interesting. Specifically, in those adults who achieved a threshold level of C15 as a result of supplementation, the threshold level being above 5 micrograms per milliliter, there did appear to be a significant improvement in some liver damage markers, the liver transaminases AST and ALT, and that's something. That said, I think one drawback of this intervention was the duration. It was only 12 weeks, and if I were designing this trial in an ideal world, I would have wanted a longer period to see if positive effect emerged in the coming months. Nevertheless, credit where it's due, these studies are getting done, and I'm sure we'll learn a lot more as the data develop, including about what optimal circulating and membrane levels of C15 should be. C15 and cellular fragility. So the connection between C15 and metabolic diseases is interesting, but of course you should now be asking how? How does C15 promote good metabolic health? And one model has to do with cellular stability, specifically membrane stability. So cell membranes are made of fatty acids, and the composition of the membranes determines their properties, including the fragility of the membrane and propensity to undergo a form of fat oxidation called peroxidation. I'll try to keep this pretty high level because I know it can get technical, but briefly, this is the model. Deficiencies in C15 in cell membranes, levels below 0.2% of total fatty acids, might make cells, particularly red blood cells, susceptible to this form of oxidation, peroxidation. And fragile and damaged red blood cells can then be eaten up by immune cells, including resident macrophages immune cells in the liver. And the metabolic fallout of all of this includes more oxidation, peroxidation, programmed cell death, ferroptosis, and inflammation, which can be detected as increases in inflammatory markers and liver enzymes, like those we mentioned earlier, all on the path to liver disease. And impaired liver function leads to insulin resistance and increased risks of metabolic syndrome, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease. So in terms of natural sources of C15, in the Western world, it's full-fat dairy. In fact, C15 is a relatively good biomarker for dairy intake, with higher intake of fatty dairy associated with higher C15 levels. And higher full-fat dairy intake and higher C15 levels each are associated with better health outcomes. But even among dairy, there is a hierarchy. And perhaps at the top of the list, the winner, pecorino cheese. A hard sheep's cheese that's one of my favorites. It's particularly rich in C15. In fact, to get the recommended in quotes, 200 milligrams of C15 per day, you just need half an ounce. About 14 grams of pecorino per day. That's nothing, and to be honest, I generally eat pecorino by the 100 or 150 gram serving, so I'm definitely getting my C15. And you can also get C15 from seafood, with some amazing sources being mullet, catfish, and sea bass.